The engineering philosophy behind the TSI-Stroke Index, designing a practical early warning system Part 1, number 1715, July 14, 2026. Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation. Category, Neuroscience. Preface for readers: eat more protein and fresh vegetables. Eat less red meat and processed food. Reduce food portions if overweight. Eating a little less will not hurt you. Overeating for years will. Exercise every day. Walk at least 7,000 to 8,000 steps daily. Drink 85 to 100 ounces to 0.5 to 3.0 liters of water each day. Sleep 6 to 7 hours every night. Manage stress. Avoid emotionally draining people and unnecessary conflicts. Put your health first. Wealth, fame, and power mean little without health and life. Preface. Most of my previous papers describing the TSI-Stroke Index have focused primarily on the mathematical model itself, its equations, numerical behavior, longitudinal observations, and clinical interpretation. Those studies explain what the TSI measures and how it changes over time. This paper has a different objective. Rather than concentrating on the mathematical equation alone, I explain the engineering philosophy and pathophysiological reasoning that guided the design of the TSI proxy. In other words, this paper focuses less on what the model is and more on why it was designed in its present form. My formal education was originally in applied mathematics, engineering mechanics, physics, computer science, and artificial intelligence. During the past 17 years, however, my research gradually expanded into psychology, adiposity, diabetes, lifestyle medicine, endocrinology, nephrology, cardiovascular disease, neurology, neuroscience, and systems pathophysiology. As this transition occurred, my perspective also evolved. Instead of viewing disease solely from a biomedical standpoint, I increasingly came to regard the human body as a living biophysical system whose behaviors governed simultaneously by solid mechanics, fluid dynamics, material behavior, metabolism, and continuous biological adaptation. This engineering perspective eventually became the foundation upon which the TSI-Stroke Index was constructed. Introduction. The TSI-Stroke Index was never intended to become another clinical risk score or another mathematical exercise. It was designed as my daily practical instrument for continuously monitoring the long-term behavior of a complex physiological system. 3 pathophysiological variables form the foundation of the model. Systolic blood pressure (SBP) represents the dynamic loading applied to the vascular system. Pulse pressure (PP) reflects the mechanical condition of the arteries, particularly their stiffness and elasticity, both of which gradually change with aging. In my 11.5 years of longitudinal data, PP demonstrates a strong correlation with age, ranging from 76% using a 90-day moving average to 82% using annual data. Estimated average glucose represents the metabolic environment that continuously influences the biomedical properties of blood vessels over many years, contributing to chronic vascular changes, such as the cerebral microvascular calcification observed in my own brain. Although these variables originate from different biomedical processes, they continuously interact within the same vascular system. Therefore, I modeled their combined effects using a multiplicative, rather than an additive, mathematical structure. A stroke rarely develops because of one isolated abnormality. Instead, multiple pathophysiological processes influence one another simultaneously. For this reason, I designed the TSI to evaluate their interaction rather than treating each variable independently. This design philosophy reflects a common engineering principle. Complex systems should not be understood by examining individual components in isolation. Instead, they should be evaluated according to how those components interact dynamically over time. Engineering philosophy. One of the most important concepts behind the TSI is the distinction between monitoring and control. The TSI is not designed to diagnose stroke. Neither is it intended to predict the exact moment when a stroke will occur. Instead, it functions as an early warning indicator that continuously monitors changes in physiological status while corrective intervention is still possible. A simple analogy illustrates this philosophy. A smoke detector provides an early warning that allows action before serious damage develops. A fire alarm, on the other hand, signals that the dangerous event is already occurring. In this analogy, the TSI functions as a smoke detector. Far more expensive diagnostic tools, such as CT and MRI, resemble fire alarms, whereas inexpensive monitoring devices, such as blood pressure monitors and glucose meters, function more like smoke detectors by providing Early warning before serious damage occurs. They are indispensable for confirming the risk of injury, but by the time they become necessary, substantial damage may already have occurred. Following my own hemorrhagic pontine stroke on June 21, 2025, I realized that waiting for neurological symptoms or extremely elevated blood pressure was already too late. What I needed was a practical way capable of recognizing unfavorable pathophysiological trends before catastrophic failure occurred. That realization became the primary motivation for developing the TSI-Stroke Index. The four design principles. Several questions have repeatedly been asked regarding the mathematical structure of the TSI. 1. Why are the three physiological variables normalized? 2. Why are they multiplied rather than added? 3. Why is the product multiplied by an amplification factor of 120? 4. Why do the operating ranges naturally fall into practical zones below 90, 90 to 100, 100 to 110, and above 110? The answers all originate from the same engineering philosophy. The objective was never mathematical elegance. The objective was practical usefulness. 1. Normalization. The TSI combines three physiological measurements: systolic blood pressure, SPP, pulse pressure, PP, estimated average glucose. Each variable is first divided by a commonly accepted physiological reference value, SPP divided by 120 mmHg, PP divided by 45 mmHg divided by 120 mg VL. These reference values are not arbitrary. They approximate desirable pathophysiological targets for healthy adults. Normalization converts measurements with different physical units into dimensionless quantities. Once this transformation is completed, vascular pressure, arterial stiffness, and glucose metabolism can be compared on the same relative scale before being integrated into one unified index. Although this normalization procedure is widely used throughout engineering, physics, and applied mathematics, the concept was first taught and emphasized me by Professor Norman Jones at MIT during 1970 to 1974. 2. Multiplication rather than addition. Most conventional medical scoring systems combine variables through weighted addition, as exemplified by the Framingham Heart Study risk score. My engineering experience led me toward a different solution. Human pathophysiology is an interconnected system. Physiological variables rarely operate independently. Instead, they continuously influence one another. For this reason, I deliberately chose multiplication. TSI equals e.g. 120 *PP 45 *SPP 120 120. When all three normalized variables remain close to 1.0, the product also remains close to 1.0. If one variable worsens, the index immediately increases. If two variables deteriorate simultaneously, their combined effect becomes greater than either variable alone, because multiplying values greater than 1 naturally amplifies the overall result. This arithmetic behavior more closely resembles many engineering systems in which unfavorable operating conditions interact rather than simply accumulate. Sometimes the most powerful mathematical ideas are not the most complicated, they are simply the ones that best represent how the physical system actually behaves. 3. Why multiply by 120? The final multiplication by an amplification factor of 120 is a scaling operation. It does not alter the mathematical relationships among systolic blood pressure, pulse pressure, and estimated average glucose. Instead, it converts the dimensionless product into a practical numerical range that is more consistent with the current healthcare system and easier to interpret during everyday health management. Without scaling, most TSI values would lie between approximately 0.70 and 1.30, although mathematically correct. Decimal values are less intuitive to the human brain than whole numbers for routine monitoring. Multiplying by 120 transforms the index into scale that clinicians and patients can interpret more naturally. Through my own longitudinal observations, the following operating ranges gradually emerged: below 90, relatively low pathophysiological risk; 90 to 100, caution; 100 to 110, elevated pathophysiological risk; above 110, high pathophysiological risk requiring immediate attention. These ranges are not intended to represent absolute clinical thresholds. Rather, they serve as practical warning system or operating guidelines developed from my own daily management and long-term observations. The TSI is not designed to diagnose stroke. It is designed to detect unfavorable pathophysiological changes before a stroke occurs. Pulse pressure is a damping factor. Although pulse pressure is less controllable than systolic blood pressure or glucose, its relative stability becomes an advantage within the TSI model. Because PP changes gradually over years rather than minutes or hours, it serves as a natural damping factor. This stable mechanical background reduces short-term variability and makes the dynamic influences of systolic blood pressure and glucose easier to distinguish. My recent analyses demonstrate a strong correlation between pulse pressure and age, reinforcing the view that PP primarily reflect long-term vascular remodeling rather than daily lifestyle fluctuations. Rather than being a limitation, this characteristic strengthens the TSI model by helping separate long-term structural vascular changes from the rapidly changing physiological responses of the more controllable biomarkers. Acute blood pressure elevation. Among the three physiological variables, systolic blood pressure deserves special attention because of its ability to change rapidly. On the day of my hemorrhagic pontine stroke, my systolic blood pressure reached approximately 175 mmHg, although many hypertensive patients occasionally experience similar values. This level proved sufficient to produce a life-threatening cerebral hemorrhage. The mathematical behavior of the TSI reflect this clinical reality. If systolic blood pressure rises to 180 mmHg while glucose and pulse pressure remain at their reference levels, the normalized SPP becomes 1.5. The resulting TSI immediately rises into a dangerous operating region. This illustrates an important engineering property of this TSI model. A single severe abnormality can rapidly shift the entire pathophysiological system into a high-risk operating state, even when the remaining variables remain relatively stable. This behavior mirrors clinical experience, where acute hypertension is recognized as one of the principal triggers for hemorrhagic stroke. This is part 1.